Chapter 1, The Shadowed Hunt. The frozen dew on the pine needles offered no cushion, but Selene hardly registered the cold. Her senses, sharp as shattered glass, were focused on the low, throbbing heartbeat of a doe just ahead. It was a rhythm of life she desperately needed to silence. Every muscle in her legs coiled, a taut spring ready to launch her from the deep shadows of the unclaimed borderlands. She moved with a liquid grace learned from years of necessity, a ghost exiled not by law, but by a chilling, unforgiving memory. She was hunting too close to the pack's perimeter tonight. The crisp air here still held the biting tang of their alpha, a scent of cedar, wet earth, and raw, undisputed authority. It reminded her that freedom had a steep price, perpetual loneliness. She had chosen independence over submission, isolation over the crushing weight of belonging to people who had once promised her family, then brutally revoked that promise. Never again, the silent vow echoed in the hollow space where her loyalty used to reside. She needed the venison for the week, and she needed to be gone before dawn bled pink across the eastern sky. A fleeting shift in the shadows of the deeper forest, a movement too deliberate for the wind, snagged her attention. She paused, breath held, her heart hammering a frantic drum against her ribs. Fear was a familiar, acid flavor on her tongue, but this sensation was different. It wasn't the blind panic of being caught, it was a profound, unexplainable pull, like a phantom thread tugging at her very core. She scanned the ancient oaks, their branches weeping moss like long, gray beards. Nothing. Just the oppressive stillness of the wilderness. Must be nerves, she decided, shoving the strange feeling deep down. Because the alternative, the idea that the Alpha's territory, the Alpha himself, was drawing her in, felt terrifying. The hunt resumed, quicker now, fueled by a nervous energy she needed to burn off. She finally spotted her target, a majestic young buck, its gaze soft, vulnerable. Its demise would be swift. Survival dictates this, she rationalized, because pity was a luxury she simply couldn't afford. The cold reality of her life demanded brutal efficiency. Suddenly, a loud, metallic snap broke the forest's quiet, followed by a sharp, agonized cry, not the sound of the buck, but a smaller, higher-pitched distress. Selene recoiled instinctively, her focus ripped away. A terrible wave of despair washed over her, mirroring the animal's suffering. Therefore, she abandoned the deer and darted toward the sound, her survival instincts momentarily overridden by a deep, compassionate impulse. She had known the sharp agony of being trapped, and it was a torment she wouldn't wish on any creature. Chapter 2, The Soft Spot and the Hard Gaze. The source of the cry was a juvenile fox, its delicate paw caught fast in a rusted, illegal snare, the work of human poachers, not the pack. The fine wire had cut deep, and the fox's eyes were wide with shock, its breath coming in ragged gasps. Although she risked lingering in this exposed area, Selene immediately knelt, the forest floor suddenly feeling less dangerous than the fear radiating off the small creature. This mirrored the smaller betrayal she had faced, the sudden, unexpected pain from a seemingly innocent source. "Shoo. I'm here," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse, the sound of soft velvet against the sharp edges of the night. She worked swiftly, her fingers surprisingly steady, because helping the defenseless was the one moral impulse she still permitted herself. The scent of pine and bruised herbs filled her nostrils as she applied a makeshift poultice of chewed leaves to the wound, her mind entirely engrossed in the delicate, painstaking task of releasing the animal. She failed to register the second scent, the raw, powerful infusion of alpha, until it was upon her, heavy and intoxicating. It carried the crispness of mountain air mixed with an unsettling, primal musk. She jerked up, her heart vaulting into her throat. Standing less than 20 feet away, partially shielded by a massive, shadowy oak, was Kael. His human form was a formidable silhouette against the gloom, all solid, uncompromising power. His silver eyes, usually cold, were burning with a strange, analytical curiosity, fixed not on her trespassing, but on the fox cradled in her arms. "You're far from your place, rogue." His voice was a low, resonant rumble, a sound that vibrated deep in her chest. It wasn't a question, it was an undisputed fact, an accusation delivered with an alpha's terrifying authority. Selene instinctively wrapped the fox tighter, defensively. "The territory is irrelevant," she retorted, her voice brittle but unwavering. It was trapped. He stepped closer, moving with an intimidating, measured pace. The moon, now fully visible through a break in the canopy, poured silver light over his chiseled face, revealing a sharp jawline and the faintest scar above his brow, a mark of old battles. He was mesmerizing, and the sight ignited a flash of unwanted heat that she immediately smothered. "The pack protects what is ours," he stated, his gaze unwavering. "And you are not ours. Why save a creature that can't be claimed?" Despite the harshness of his words, his eyes held an arresting quality, a flicker of something Selene couldn't decipher. Was it recognition? Or just the typical alpha disdain for an outcast? "I do it because I choose to," she shot back, feeling defensive, like a cornered animal herself. "My choices are my own, Alpha. They don't require your justification or yours." The look he gave her was complicated, a landscape of hidden storms. He saw her, truly saw her vulnerability and her determination. He witnessed the paradox, the guarded, isolated woman who risked everything for a wounded creature. This is why he hesitated, the usual alpha command suspended in the thick, charged air between them. What is he seeing? She wondered, fighting the urge to retreat entirely. He finally tore his gaze from her to look at the fox, a tiny, almost imperceptible softening around his mouth. "Be gone before sunup, Selene," he ordered, the use of her name sounding startlingly intimate, a velvet lash. "And don't cross the mark again." As he turned and disappeared into the dense woods, she let out a shaky breath. But the oddest thing happened. His scent, the powerful mix of cedar and musk, didn't dissipate. It clung to her, a warm, forbidden film, particularly strong on her hands where she had gripped the fox. It felt like a tether, because she realized, with a chilling jolt, that he hadn't just watched her, he had marked her. Chapter 3, The First Scuffle. Following the abrupt encounter with Kael, Selene felt an intense, feverish energy pulsing beneath her skin. The alpha's scent, accidentally transferred during their momentary confrontation, lingered like a haunting melody, a heavy, forbidden fragrance that seemed to amplify the natural, earthy musk of her own shifting cycle. This forced, phantom closeness was driving her mad. Therefore, she spent the next week running, pushing herself deeper into the neutral lands, trying to physically outpace the memory of his gaze. "That man's dominance is a cage," she thought, her internal monologue sharp and defensive. One afternoon, while setting up a temporary shelter near a low-running creek, the sound of snapping twigs alerted her. It wasn't the pack's methodical patrol, this was rushed, heavy, and frantic. A trio of wolves from the neighboring Grey Peak pack, known for their reckless territorial aggression, burst through the brush. Their eyes held a predatory glint, their snarls peeling back lips to reveal unsettlingly long canines. They were hunting her, and they were far from their territory. "Look what we found, boys," the lead wolf, a hulking male with a scarred muzzle, sneered. "A stray from the alpha's discard pile. Thought you could hide, little loner?" The high-stakes conflict was immediate and terrifying. She hadn't seen them coming, because she'd been too busy trying to cleanse herself of Kael's residual scent. Selene didn't hesitate. She shifted, her own transformation a quick, efficient blur of bone reshaping and fur bursting forth. The pain was a familiar, agonizing tide she rode instinctively, not a romantic fantasy, but a raw, primal necessity. She was smaller, leaner than the males, but she was faster, a silver streak of defiant energy. Like a viper striking out, she lunged. The fight was a symphony of snarls, impacts, and the frantic scrabble of claws on stone. She fought with the desperate ferocity of someone with nothing left to lose. She evaded a devastating bite, retaliating with a shallow rake across the scarred male's flank. Suddenly, a massive, coal-black wolf, silent and devastating, burst from the tree line. It was Kael's alpha form, a creature of magnificent, terrifying power. His arrival was unexpected, an unbelievable twist of fate. He followed me. She realized with a shocking clarity, a confusing blend of terror and relief flooding her system. The black wolf didn't waste time. He moved with cold, calculated precision, taking down the two flanking males with brutal efficiency. His focus was absolute. He wasn't saving her for her, he was eliminating a threat to his borders, but the result was the same: she was alive. Kael turned on the scarred leader, a low, guttural growl ripping from his throat, a sound of pure, undisputed claim that made Selene's fur stand on end. The Grey Peak Alpha, recognizing the immediate shift in power, whimpered and fled, dragging his injured pack-mates with him. Kael stood over her, his huge body radiating intense heat and authority. The moment was thick with charged tension, the air crackling with unspent primal energy. His wolf muzzle lowered, and he nudged her gently, a shocking, tender action. Then, in a moment that felt both intensely intimate and completely accidental, his snout brushed the side of her neck, right over her scent gland. He didn't just touch her, he left a fresh, potent mark, a possessive command she felt down to her marrow. He shifted back, his clothes reappearing magically, leaving him exposed but magnificent under the fading light. His eyes, now human, were dark, conflicted, and intense. "You trespass on my borders. You fight my battles," he said, his voice laced with forced restraint. He hesitated, then whispered something so low she almost missed it, something intensely personal that spoke of a deep, haunting loneliness. "I never wanted another war, especially not with destiny." He turned and strode back into the trees, leaving her breathless, scarred, and inexplicably tethered. His wolf had come looking for her again, and this time, the scent of their unspoken, undeniable bond was too strong to ignore. This isn't about territory anymore, Selene thought, trembling slightly as she shifted back, touching the burning spot on her neck. This is about something ancient, something that will destroy us both. Chapter 4: The Unclaimed Rescue. The lingering trace of Kael's dominant scent had become a haunting perfume on Selene's skin, an invisible leash that defied her independence. She had retreated to a dilapidated, abandoned cabin near a remote river fork, seeking the anonymity of human ruins. Consequently, she felt strangely exposed, almost as if she were waiting for the inevitable hammer to fall. Her sanctuary was a desperate gamble, because the closer she crept to the edges of civilization, the further she strayed from the natural cover of the wild forest, making her vulnerable to human threats, or worse, rival shifters who saw her as easy prey. She was meticulously polishing a worn hunting knife, the metal reflecting the faint, bruised light of dusk, when the cabin's door was violently splintered inward. The sheer force of the blow echoed like a gunshot. Standing framed in the wreckage was a different male, broad, feral, and marked by scars that weren't honorable. This was Rorik, the alpha from the ruthless Grey Peak pack Kael had chased off before. Rorik's presence was a shocking reminder of the dangers she faced alone. "The Alpha King marked your throat, little toy," Rorik rasped, his eyes burning with possessive malice, a sickening blend of desire and contempt. "But kings sometimes forget their treasures. We haven't." Selene scrambled back, her heart a frantic captive in her chest. The high stakes were immediate. Rorik hadn't come for territory, he'd come for her. Unlike the calculated confrontation with Kael, this was a savage, lethal intent. Her fear wasn't about pain, it was about the sickening violation of being owned. But just as Rorik lunged, his immense shadow falling over her, the air fractured. A blur of obsidian fur slammed into the rival Alpha with the force of a falling boulder. The sound of their collision was sickening, a deep, resonant crack that momentarily stunned Selene. Kael's wolf, magnificent and terrifying, had arrived. He intercepted Rorik's killing blow, saving her life by a sliver of time, because his inherent nature couldn't allow another alpha to claim a creature he had designated as his periphery. The ensuing fight was a primal ballet of muscle and fury. Kael's movements were fluid, disciplined, and lethally efficient, a striking contrast to Rorik's clumsy, brute strength. Like two tidal waves crashing against a shore, their bodies slammed repeatedly into the wooden walls, shaking the very foundations of the structure. Kael finally pinned Rorik with a devastating bite to the shoulder, a clear sign of dominance. Rorik cried out, a high, panicked sound, before fleeing into the night, nursing his wound and swearing vengeance that hung thick in the air. Selene shifted back, her skin clammy with shock, her borrowed clothes shredded. She was furious, the immediate surge of relief instantly replaced by a burning resentment. Kael shifted, his chest heaving, his powerful frame momentarily backlit by a shaft of moonlight pouring through the ruined doorway. "You should have listened to my warning, stray," he clipped out, his voice a low, gravelly reprimand. "I didn't ask for your intervention," she spat back, wrapping her arms around her trembling body. "I am not yours to save." His silver gaze pierced her, cold and assessing. "You are valuable, whether you accept it or not," he stated with chilling certainty. "You fight too well to be lost to a fool like Rorik. And now, you are a beacon of conflict on my borders. You are my problem, because I touched you." Before she could form a rebuttal, Kael performed an action that sealed her fate under the brutal, ancient tenets of supernatural law. He stepped close, his hand closing gently, possessively, over the mark he had already placed on her neck during the scuffle. His thumb lingered there for a breath-stopping moment. The action wasn't rough, it was deliberate and final. A spark, hotter than anything she had ever felt, flared between them, searing away her ability to deny their connection. "Your survival is now intrinsically linked to mine," he murmured, his breath hot against her ear. "It's fate, Selene. Or maybe just bad luck. But the bond is sealed. You belong on my watch now." This shocking declaration marked the beginning of forced proximity, initiating a tension that promised danger and devastating intimacy. Chapter 5: The Full Moon Shadow. The forced proximity began with a relentless, invisible harassment. Following Kael's declaration at the dilapidated cabin, Selene attempted to maintain her distance, moving with extreme caution. She tried to relocate even deeper into the wild, only to find that no matter how winding her path, how dark the cave, or how high the ridge, Kael's immense wolf shadow was always there. The moon, usually a source of quiet power, had become her relentless tormentor, because with every silver rise, Kael's most primal self came stalking. The strange pull she felt intensified with the lunar cycle, morphing from a vague yearning into a desperate, physical ache that radiated from her core. It was the irresistible, terrifying call of the fated bond, and she resisted it with every fiber of her being. She would spend her days trying to forget, only for the cool, damp night air to carry the powerful, magnetic scent of his wild form straight to her. "I cannot escape this," she thought, her anxiety building like a relentless, slow-motion tidal wave. One night, the pull became unbearable. She was running, not hunting, but fleeing the intensity of his presence. As a result, she tripped over an exposed root, tumbling down a steep, pine-covered embankment. She ended up sprawled and winded at the base, looking up to see Kael's enormous wolf standing silent sentry above her, his shadow dominating the moonlit scene. He didn't move, he simply waited. She scrambled to her feet, shaking from frustration and fear. "Stop following me," she cried, her voice echoing plaintively in the hollow stillness. "You banished me once. Why does your wolf refuse to leave me alone now?" It was true, she demanded autonomy, yet she felt a flutter of warmth knowing his instinct was to protect her, even against his own human judgment. His wolf responded not with a bark or a growl, but with a low, mournful whine, a sound of deep, profound loneliness that pierced her defenses. It was a story of regret, and it made her heart clench painfully. Suddenly, an opportunity for a hunt presented itself, a smaller, slower deer grazing carelessly near the creek. Selene needed the meat, Kael needed the distraction. They were forced, against all logic, into a reluctant partnership. They hunted in perfect, silent synchronicity. Selene, the agile silver streak, drove the deer toward Kael, the powerful, silent black wolf, who anticipated her moves with an eerie, intimate knowledge. This kind of coordination, she realized, could only come from a deep, supernatural connection. Their movements were a single, flowing thought, and the intensity of the shared hunt was almost erotic. The chase ended swiftly. Kael made the kill, clean and efficient. Then, instead of eating or leaving, he brought the carcass back to her. He deposited it carefully at her feet and then lay down nearby, his massive head resting on his paws, his silver eyes watching her with unsettling devotion. It was an offering, an acknowledgement of her survival needs, and a silent statement of his responsibility. Because she could not deny the hunger, she accepted the offering. She ate quickly, keenly aware of his warm, intimidating presence. "I am losing this fight," she admitted internally. The bond was forcing her to question everything, her autonomy, her past decisions, and her capacity for trust. She began to wonder, was the fated connection a curse, or was it the only medicine that could ever mend the broken, isolated pieces of her heart? The moment was shattered by a low, rhythmic noise emanating from Kael's chest, a soft, rumbling sound that was a wolf's equivalent of a human purr. It was a sound of profound contentment, of being exactly where he belonged, by her side. This unexpected vulnerability in his primal state was the final, devastating hook. Chapter 6: The Unspoken Vulnerability. The purr was the final blow to Selene's emotional wall. It was a noise too intimate, too unguarded for the imposing alpha. Therefore, she knew she couldn't continue fighting fate and Rorik's renewed aggression simultaneously. Rorik, driven by his own desperate ambition, had escalated his attacks, threatening nearby human settlements to lure Kael out, making Selene realize the threat wasn't just to her anymore, it was to the innocents caught in the crossfire. This realization forced a cold, hard choice upon her. She approached Kael's territory the next morning, not skulking, but walking with deliberate purpose. She found him at the edge of his territory, checking the boundaries, the scent of fresh pine resin mixing with his characteristic alpha musk. "I need to talk," she stated, cutting straight through the tense atmosphere. He turned, his face etched with exhaustion and the burden of leadership. "You finally realized your pride is less important than your survival," he challenged, his tone sharp. "My survival isn't the point anymore," Selene countered, standing her ground. "Rorik is using me to provoke a war. People are going to get hurt, and that includes the humans your pack is sworn to protect. We need to cooperate." She felt the intense, heavy pressure of this decision. Accepting Kael meant relinquishing the independence she had fought so fiercely to keep. Kael studied her, his eyes searching, assessing the honesty of her intent. It was as if she had passed an invisible test. The rigidity around his mouth softened slightly, revealing a hint of the burdened man beneath the Alpha King. "Cooperation is submission," he murmured, stepping closer, his imposing presence threatening to swallow her whole. "No," Selene insisted, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Cooperation is strategy. Your power, my agility. We eliminate Rorik, and then I go back to my shadow. That's the deal." Her new immediate goal was simple: stay alive, reluctantly cooperate, and safeguard the innocents. He looked intensely relieved, a flash of gratitude that was immediately veiled by his alpha mask. "Very well, Selene," he agreed, his voice a low promise. "But when you walk the pack lands under my protection, you follow my commands. We start tonight." The agreement crossed the threshold into the story's main tension. There was no turning back from the path that merged their destinies. As they stood side by side, planning their first coordinated moves against Rorik, the setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows. Kael pointed out a weak spot in the surrounding forest, detailing Rorik's likely approach. "He is desperate now," Kael explained, his voice flat. "Desperate men make dangerous mistakes. He wants this territory, because it's what he lost when his own mate abandoned him." Selene's breath hitched. She hadn't known Rorik was a widower. This was an interesting plot twist. Kael paused, staring out at the darkening woods, his jaw tight. "Betrayal is the sharpest weapon," he whispered, his voice suddenly thick with emotion, sounding utterly broken. He hadn't been speaking about Rorik anymore. He was speaking of himself, of his own past wounds, the revelation dropping like a stone into the silence between them. He turned slightly, thinking she hadn't heard the fragile admission. She made me feel like I was not enough. He murmured, his eyes glazed with a deep, private sorrow she should never have witnessed. Selene felt a jolt of devastating empathy. The Alpha, the powerful king, was haunted by a similar ghost of rejection. This emotional vulnerability, whispered without intention, forged a bond far stronger than any supernatural mark. She reached out, her fingers brushing his forearm, the first unforced, tender touch. The heat that sparked was immediate, sharp, and undeniably passionate. Their eyes locked, and the planning dissolved into the sudden, terrifying realization that they were no longer just strategizing against Rorik, they were fighting the inevitable, burning collision of two broken hearts. Chapter 7, A Lesson in Trust. The fragile agreement with Kael immediately plunged Selene into a reality of intense, frustrating proximity. Her days were now consumed by his relentless training regimen, which focused on integrating her solitary, defensive maneuvers with the coordinated movements necessary for pack survival. In spite of her natural swiftness and skill, Selene bristled under his authority. Every instruction felt like a heavy chain, threatening to bind her spirit just when she thought she had earned her freedom. I escaped one cage, I won't enter another, she silently fumed. Your reaction time is excellent, but you compensate for lack of support, Kael stated one afternoon, his voice calm yet demanding, after she narrowly avoided a simulated attack by relying solely on her own swift retreat. They were deep within his territory, practicing complex evasion techniques among jagged, exposed granite formations. Because he was trying to teach her to trust a partner's presence, he moved with the infuriating precision of a natural-born teacher. I don't need support, she shot back, wiping a sheen of sweat from her brow, her chest heaving. Reliance is a weakness. I survive because I only depend on myself. That philosophy is why Rorik nearly claimed you, he countered, his silver eyes flashing with annoyance and a deeper, paternal exasperation. We are stronger together, Selene. That is the fundamental law of the pack. You must learn to anticipate my next move, not just your escape route. He knew her independence was built on layers of trauma, but he couldn't afford to indulge her distrust when their lives depended on perfect synchronization. He moved toward her swiftly, illustrating a block. You leave yourself exposed here, he demonstrated, his large, calloused hand gripping her wrist, turning her palm upward. The sudden, hot contact sent a jolt of pure, forbidden desire, a sharp, electric spark, up her arm and straight to her throat, momentarily stealing her breath. His skin was warm, rugged, and smelled powerfully of the forest after a spring rain. Selene instantly yanked her arm back, her face flushing crimson with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Don't touch me, she commanded, her voice thin. The tension in the air was suddenly thick, no longer purely combative, but deeply intimate. Kael stood still, his gaze piercing her with an intense, raw honesty. Like a curtain ripped away, she saw a flicker of the man beneath the Alpha, the man who was just as afraid of this powerful, unwanted connection as she was. You resist guidance, you resist touch, you resist the bond, he stated, his voice low and rich. How do you expect to survive the fight if you won't accept the necessary connection? He wasn't talking about fighting Rorik anymore, he was talking about their fate. The training resumed, but the underlying dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Every close maneuver, every accidental brush of their clothes, became charged with the memory of that unexpected spark, reinforcing the dangerous fact that forced reliance was breeding desire. She knew, with chilling certainty, that the tension building between them was a volatile force, ready to explode and consume them both. This was no longer just about survival, it was about resisting the devastating pull of their entwined bodies and souls. Chapter 8, The Shadow of His Past. The physical intensity of the training gave way to a quieter, more insidious form of intimacy, the sharing of vulnerabilities. As they continued to monitor Rorik's erratic movements, they spent long, tense hours huddled over maps and scouting reports. Selene, determined to understand her reluctant partner, began to peel back the layers of Kael's guarded persona. She sought to understand the sorrow that darkened his eyes, the same raw grief she had glimpsed when he muttered about betrayal. She found herself in the pack's small, heavily secured archives, ostensibly searching for ancient Grey Peak pack conflict data. While rifling through dusty, rolled parchment, she stumbled upon a faded pack photo, a formal portrait featuring a younger, smiling Kael standing next to a stunningly beautiful female with fiery red hair. The woman's eyes held a brittle, distant quality, despite her smile. A chilling wave of insight washed over Selene. This must be her. His former mate. When Kael walked in, his presence immediately dominating the small space, she didn't hide the photograph. She held it out, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. "Tell me about her," she urged, her tone gentle, curiosity battling the fear of dredging up old pain. Because her own backstory was defined by betrayal, she knew that understanding his deepest wound was the only way they could coexist. Kael's face shuddered, his expression becoming a mask of stone. The temperature in the room seemed to drop immediately. "Her name was Lyra," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, heavy with regret. "She was my destined mate, and my weakness." Unlike his typical authoritative stance, he looked utterly defeated, the weight of his past crushing his broad shoulders. He recounted, in brief, agonizing sentences, how Lyra had found the responsibilities of the alpha female suffocating. She had craved excitement, power without consequence, and eventually, she had betrayed Kael and the pack by selling ancient secrets to a rival faction. This revelation solidified the plot twist. His banishment of Selene wasn't just about pack law, it was a scar tissue reaction, a preemptive strike against the fear of being wounded again. "She taught me that fate is not a guarantee of loyalty," he concluded, his voice laced with the bitterness of old wine. "She broke the pack's faith because she valued her own power above us all." The profound vulnerability of his confession deepened their connection instantaneously, transforming their dynamic from forced cooperation to mutual, sorrowful understanding. Just as Selene reached out to offer a word of comfort, the silent alarm siren, muffled for pack ears, began a frantic pulse. Rorik's men had breached a secondary border, a calculated distraction. Before she could react, Kael grabbed her arm, his protective instincts blazing. "Rorik is setting a trap," Kael growled, his mind already assessing the risk. "He knows I won't risk leaving my borders exposed again." They sprinted through the moon-drenched forest, the archive scene instantly replaced by heart-pounding tension. They arrived near the breach just as Rorik's wolves sprung their trap, a net of silver-laced wire dropped from the canopy, aimed directly at Selene, who was exposed on the flank. Like a shadow in Fast Forward, Kael reacted instantly. He shoved her violently aside, taking the brunt of the heavy, painful netting himself. He roared, not in pain, but in primal frustration, the silver burning his skin, the sight of his protective sacrifice a powerful, emotional blow that solidified his deep-seated care for her. Chapter 9, The Eruption. Kael, having been caught in the silver trap, was temporarily vulnerable. Selene, shaking off the shock of his protective action, felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with potent, terrifying love. She shifted, moving with lightning speed to tear the burning wire from his massive body. Following the immediate danger of the trap, they quickly drove off the remaining enemy wolves, but the encounter left them both raw, exhausted, and intimately aware of how easily they could lose each other. To prevent another immediate attack, they retreated to a deep, natural cave near the Boundary River, a location known for its excellent defensibility. Because Kael was still weak from the silver exposure, they had no choice but to camp together, seeking warmth and mutual protection against the bitter night air. The high-stakes conflict of the evening had bled into their internal world, leaving them with an electric, inescapable awareness of each other. They sat opposite one another near a low, crackling fire, the golden light casting dancing shadows over the damp rock walls. Selene's goal remained to protect herself and maintain distance, yet the sheer magnetic presence of Kael was a physical force she could no longer ignore. "You took a silver trap for me," Selene finally whispered, her voice husky. "Why?" "You risked permanent damage because of a woman you banished." Kael's eyes, heavy with exhaustion, met hers. "I took it because I cannot lose another." Not to betrayal, and certainly not to an enemy's trap, he admitted, the words heavy with unspoken meaning. I may have commanded you to leave, but my wolf never obeyed the order. He is desperate for the connection, for the healing only you can bring. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken attraction and desire. The heat from the fire was nothing compared to the feverish intensity sparking between them. Unlike their previous tense moments, this was no longer anger, it was pure, unadulterated yearning. Selene found herself tracing the powerful line of his jaw with her eyes, noting the faint sheen of sweat, the vulnerability in his stance. Kael shifted closer, the movement slow and deliberate, like a hunter closing in on necessary prey. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and gently brushed a damp strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was devastating, soft, tender, and scorching all at once. We cannot deny this, Selene, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. The wolf demands it. She leaned into his palm, a silent acknowledgement of the growing heat and the impossible attraction. She was tired of fighting the current. Consequently, she let her defenses crumble, just for this moment. This first intimate night where the unspoken attraction erupted was a critical turning point. Just as Kael leaned in, his intent clear, a sharp, disturbing sound ripped through the tense quiet, the distant, mocking howl of a rival alpha. Rorik was outside the cave entrance, closer than they realized, his presence piquing the tension and directly interrupting their budding closeness. The threat was immediate, pulling them brutally back from the brink of emotional surrender. Rorik's voice, amplified by the cavern entrance, sliced through the air, "Enjoy your last night, Alpha. That rogue will be mine by dawn." The final hook solidified the danger, ensuring their newfound emotional closeness would be immediately tested by lethal conflict. Chapter 10, The Reckless Gambit. Rorik's taunt, "That rogue will be mine by dawn," had pierced the intimate silence of the cave, igniting Selene's fierce, protective defiance. She refused to be a pawn, especially one used to lure Kael into a deadly trap. Therefore, driven by a desperate need to assert her independence and prove she wasn't just another vulnerable female, she formulated a reckless plan. If I take Rorik out, the threat disappears, and the need for Kael's protection ends, she reasoned, simplifying the high stakes of her decision. She slipped out of the cave before the first blush of dawn, leaving Kael a terse note scrawled on birch bark, "I am settling the score. Stay put." Though anxiety tightened her chest, she felt a heady rush of confidence. Her solitary existence had taught her stealth that no pack training could match. Her mission was a risky solo confrontation: find Rorik's hidden camp and incapacitate him before he could execute his dawn attack. She moved through the shadowy forest with the silent efficiency of an apex predator. Like smoke weaving through dense trees, she tracked Rorik's heavy, careless scent to a small clearing near a frozen waterfall. She found Rorik alone, tending to his wounded flank where Kael had bitten him. He was distracted, cursing softly, his focus entirely on the pain, not his perimeter. Consequently, Selene saw her opening and shifted, attacking with immediate, devastating intent. She was a flash of silver, aiming for the injured shoulder. The fight was brutal and short. Rorik was stronger, his bulk overwhelming, but Selene was faster, fueled by anger and adrenaline. She managed to rake her claws across his chest, opening a deep wound that momentarily stunned him. However, his strength quickly returned, and he cornered her against a wall of ice. "You think you are clever, stray," he bellowed, his voice vibrating with predatory glee, pinning her with his weight. "You should know by now, King Kael always sends his weakest bait first." Just as Rorik prepared for the killing blow, Selene executed a frantic, last-second maneuver, slipping free and disappearing into a cluster of dense, low-hanging juniper bushes. She narrowly escaped, her side burning from a deep scratch Rorik had managed to inflict. However, her escape route forced her too close to the river's edge, a known danger zone. She was bleeding heavily, leaving a stark, undeniable trail on the frosted grass. She was exposed, terrified, and moments from collapse. Hidden on a ridge above, watching the entire desperate, foolish gambit, Kael had been forced to witness her near death. He hadn't intervened openly, honoring her demand for independence, yet the moment Rorik cornered her, Kael's restraint shattered. He was already shifting, a low, murderous growl building in his throat, because his wolf could not tolerate the sight of his mate in danger, regardless of her pride. He knew then that the only way to keep her alive was to stop respecting her demands for space. Her growth and stubbornness had been demonstrated, but now, her survival was his only priority. He lunged down the slope, a dark, protective blur closing the distance. Chapter 11: The Inevitable Truth. Kael's intervention was swift and decisive. He didn't engage Rorik, he simply flanked the bleeding Selene, his massive black wolf body providing an impenetrable shield. Although Rorik snarled and threatened, he retreated, unwilling to face the Alpha King while the female was fully protected. The immediate danger passed, but the tension between Kael and Selene was excruciating, a taut wire ready to snap. Kael shifted back, his human eyes blazing with a mixture of raw fury and overwhelming relief. He knelt beside her, checking the deep wound on her side, his touch surprisingly gentle, like fine velvet against raw silk. "You risked everything, your life, my war, our survival, to prove a point," he ground out, his voice shaking with restrained emotion. "Do you understand the magnitude of your folly?" Selene, weakened and still reeling from the shock, could only manage a choked, defiant whisper. "I have to be free, Kael. I can't be bound." His gaze locked onto hers, no longer angry, but filled with a terrifying, undeniable truth. He took her face gently between his large, warm hands, forcing her to meet his intensity. "You are not free, Selene," he said, his voice dropping to a low, irreversible declaration. "You never were. This pull, this fire, this need to protect you that nearly broke my control back there, it is not a chance. It is not bad luck. It is the inescapable reality of the supernatural law." He paused, the silence stretching into an eternity, allowing the sheer weight of the moment to settle. "We are fated, Selene. We are mates." The midpoint shift hit Selene like a physical blow. Shock paralyzed her. Because she had built her life on the denial of connection and the fear of commitment, the admission that their painful bond was destiny challenged her deepest assumptions. Her immediate goal shifted from surviving Rorik to resisting the terrifying implications of the bond. "No," she whispered, her resistance a weak, panicked plea. "I choose my path. I choose my freedom." "You choose the fight," Kael corrected, his thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. "But the gods chose us. We are bound by the threads of fate, two halves of a whole, and no amount of running will sever the connection." This truth raised the stakes emotionally, turning the external fight against Rorik into an internal conflict between personal autonomy and cosmic destiny. In the midst of this overwhelming emotional climax, Rorik exploited their tension. A rock, launched from the heights above, struck Selene sharply on the head, knocking her sideways. Before Kael could react, Rorik and two of his most brutal warriors descended rapidly. Rorik grabbed Selene, his hand clamping over her mouth, his eyes triumphant. "Thank you for the distraction, Alpha," Rorik sneered at Kael, dragging Selene away swiftly toward the deeper, darker woods. "Now I have the bait, and you have the choice, your pack or your pet." Chapter 12: The Price of Possessiveness. The impact of the stone left Selene dizzy and disoriented. One moment she was locked in a devastating emotional truth with Kael, the next, she was captured, the rough, possessive grip of Rorik a sickening violation. As a result, the terrifying scent of the rival Alpha and the acrid smell of fear overwhelmed her. Her immediate goal was simple survival, but it was now tangled with the desperate need to reconcile her fierce independence with the terrifying reality of her feelings for Kael. Rorik dragged her through a thicket of thorns and into a makeshift, heavily guarded enclosure deep within the enemy territory. He tied her securely, placing her within a perimeter saturated with toxic wolfsbane, a clear, cruel message to Kael that intervention would be lethal. Left alone, Selene forced herself to breathe, fighting the rising panic. She focused on Kael's face, the shock, the fury, the pure, raw devastation in his eyes when Rorik had dragged her away. She realized, with blinding clarity, that Kael's vulnerability was even greater than hers. Unlike her, who was simply resisting the bond, he was now facing the potential catastrophic loss of his mate for a second time. The memory of Lyra's betrayal and abandonment must be echoing savagely in his mind. Back in his territory, Kael was engulfed by an agonizing, internal storm. He knew this. Therefore, his inability to act immediately, restrained by the deadly wolfsbane barrier, would be tearing him apart. He understood then, in that moment of acute vulnerability, the depth of his feelings. It wasn't just duty or destiny, it was an overwhelming, protective love that transcended pack law and past trauma. She cannot be harmed, the primal voice in his soul roared, or I will cease to exist. Selene used the quiet desperation of her captivity to process the dizzying emotional shift. She still feared the cage of commitment, yet she desperately yearned for Kael's strength, his scent, and the crushing security of his embrace. Her fear of rejection began to lose its potency against the far greater fear of Rorik's brutal ownership. The forced acknowledgement of her feelings was complete. She did love him, she did want the bond. The transformation was an agonizing psychological turning point. Suddenly, a shift in the perimeter brought Rorik back, his scarred face alight with malicious triumph. He knelt before her, holding a silver blade. The Alpha King is terrified, he whispered, pressing the cold steel to her throat. He thinks he has lost you. I will use you to destroy his power, and then I will claim the pieces. Selene stared into his hate-filled eyes. Just as despair threatened to swallow her, she heard a sound, not a snarl, but a profound, resonant howl that shook the very ground. It was Kael, but his call was different, a promise, a declaration of war, and an oath that cut through the night like a searing flame. It was the point of no return. He had chosen. Rorik looked up, his face momentarily paling. Kael's voice, carried by the power of his shift, echoed clearly through the trees, a primal vow that sealed their future. I swear on the bones of my ancestors, you will not harm her again. She is mine, and I am coming for her. Chapter 13, The Alpha's Price. Kael's resonant howl, a promise of rescue and a declaration of ownership, had been the anchor that kept Selene from succumbing to despair in Rorik's cold, wolfsbane-laced prison. That night, the ground vibrated with the tension of an imminent siege. Selene's emotional state shifted from raw terror to a desperate, growing hope, because for the first time, she was relying entirely on someone else's love to save her. Kael's approach was a masterclass in aggressive strategy. He didn't merely send warriors, he came himself, leading a flanking force that tore through Rorik's outer defenses. However, the wolfsbane perimeter surrounding Selene was a deadly deterrent, forcing Kael to confront the enemy Alpha face to face, risking his own dominance and life. Release her, Rorik! Kael's voice boomed, sharp and cold as glacier ice. Rorik sneered, stepping away from the cage, his scarred face alight with malicious satisfaction. She is a known rogue, Alpha King. I am simply enforcing your own law. Come closer and claim her, and watch your title dissolve under the silver. Kael ignored the threat to his own safety, his gaze fixed solely on Selene. He knew that engaging Rorik on the poison-laced ground would compromise his status and likely kill him, but the choice was already made. He shifted, a breathtaking, primal transformation that showed his full, terrifying power, and walked straight through the burning wolfsbane perimeter toward her. His skin smoked, and a low, agonizing whimper escaped his throat, quickly masked by a savage snarl. He was risking his alpha status, his health, and the stability of his entire pack for her. Selene watched, horrified yet utterly captivated, as Kael reached her cage. Like a creature reborn from fire, he ripped the bars apart, the sound echoing the shattering of her final emotional barriers. Trust me, Selene, he commanded, his voice raw with pain. She didn't hesitate. Her fear of commitment dissolved entirely, replaced by the profound realization that true love was sacrifice, not constraint. She scrambled out, clinging to his massive, powerful form as he turned to face Rorik again. Her transformation from guarded outcast to a woman relying on love was complete in that moment of pure, desperate reliance. Rorik, stunned by Kael's reckless defiance, quickly regrouped. As a result, he let out a guttural, furious cry and vowed vengeance. "You pay the price for this weakness, Alpha. I will burn your pack to ash." The tension escalated wildly, sealing their fates together in a shared, lethal conflict. Chapter 14, The Self-Assertion. Kael's daring rescue confirmed their absolute bond, but Selene knew she couldn't rely on him to constantly intercept every bullet aimed her way. Following their frantic retreat from Rorik's camp, Selene felt a surge of empowered energy. She was no longer the victim or the bait, she was an active participant in this war. Her goal became asserting her power and independence, not by running, but by fighting alongside Kael. They established a temporary command post near a swift-running river, a neutral zone they could defend. However, the confrontation was inevitable. Selene, determined to prove her worth, insisted on joining the front line. "He targeted me," she stated firmly to Kael, who stood silhouetted against the waning moonlight, his jaw set in a stubborn line. "I will be the one to face him. I know his weaknesses, because I fought him alone. Let me draw him out." Kael studied her, recognizing the transformation in her eyes, the shift from fear to fierce, focused intent. He realized her growth required this act of self-assertion. "If you face him, you do it as my mate, under my protection, and following my signal," he finally conceded, his authority layered with possessive concern. The confrontation was staged near the river's edge. Selene shifted, her silver wolf a visible declaration of her loyalty and strength. She moved to the center of the clearing, drawing Rorik out with a primal, challenging howl. Rorik, seeing her alone and seemingly unprotected, fell for the bait. He charged, a brute of muscle and fury. Unlike their previous encounters, Selene didn't just evade, she engaged. She met his attack head-on, fighting with a disciplined rage that showcased her recent training combined with her inherent survival instincts. She was agile, striking quickly at his exposed wounds, proving she was no longer a victim, but a lethal force. She pinned Rorik momentarily, her teeth close to his throat, forcing him to whimper a desperate surrender. This triumph was a profound moment of transformation, solidifying her courage and growth. But Rorik was a master of manipulation. In a desperate, cowardly move, his remaining warriors burst from the trees, not carrying weapons, but carrying human children, innocents they had snatched from the nearby town as leverage. The stakes instantly skyrocketed. "Kill the children, Alpha, or surrender the rogue." Rorik roared, regaining his arrogant swagger. The threat was devastating, forcing Kael and Selene into an impossible corner. Chapter 15, The Absolute Choice. The sight of the terrified, crying children instantly shattered the triumph of Selene's self-assertion. The conflict had evolved from a personal spat over territory into a morally agonizing decision that threatened the sanctity of Kael's pack duty. Kael's face was a mask of sheer agony. His pack law demanded the protection of all within his sphere, especially innocents. Yet, Rorik held Selene's life and the children's hostage. The choice was brutal: pack stability, or the woman who carried his heart and his destiny. "Choose, Alpha." Rorik mocked, pressing a knife to a small child's throat. "Your pack, your honor, your duty, or the banished mate?" Selene looked at Kael, her eyes filled with desperate, silent resolve. She knew the weight of his guilt over Lyra's betrayal, she knew the pressure of his leadership. She shook her head slightly, communicating her willingness to sacrifice herself to save the children and his pack's honor. But Kael was no longer the guilt-ridden alpha bound by historical precedent. He was a man fully committed to the woman who had healed his soul. Therefore, his transformation reached its apex in this moment of impossible choice. "Rorik, listen to me." Kael's voice was low, terrifyingly calm, stripping away all pretense of negotiation. "The children are not yours to touch. But neither is Selene." He shifted, not into his full alpha wolf, but a stance that blended human and wolf, embodying his dual commitment. "My duty is to the pack. My pack is defined by the one who stands beside me, Kael declared, his eyes burning with absolute, non-negotiable devotion. I choose Selene. Because she is the future of my lineage, and she is the heart of my purpose. This declaration completed his commitment, love over rules, destiny over duty. The transformation was complete, they were fully locked in. He moved with blinding speed, not toward the children, but directly toward Rorik, accepting the desperate gamble. He used the brief distraction to get close, engaging Rorik in a devastating, close-quarters combat. But Rorik was ready. He threw one of the children toward a rocky precipice, forcing Kael to divert his attention. As Kael lunged to catch the innocent, Rorik seized the advantage. He struck Kael with a hidden wolfsbane dagger, sinking it deep into the Alpha's side. Kael roared, a sound of agony and fury, staggering backward as the poison began its rapid work. Selene screamed, realizing the terrible turn. Rorik laughed, a chilling, triumphant sound, as he regained control of the battle and the remaining hostages. The antagonist had gained a devastating advantage, the scene concluding in the lowest moment, Kael poisoned, Selene paralyzed by fear, and the innocents still threatened. All seemed tragically lost. Chapter 16, The Agony of Separation. The wolfsbane dagger sank into Kael's flank, and the world fractured into a horrifying kaleidoscope of pain and despair. In that instant, Rorik capitalized on the Alpha's staggering fall, securing Kael with thick chains forged from cold iron, a metal anathema to shifters, and dragging him away toward his hidden stronghold. Selene, distracted by Kael's agonizing collapse, was slammed against a jagged rock by one of Rorik's guards, leaving her momentarily stunned and grievously injured. As a result, her head was spinning, her vision blurring, and a deep, burning pain radiated from her ribs. Rorik left her for dead, focusing solely on parading his captured prize, the poisoned Alpha King. He thinks I'm defeated, she realized through a haze of pain, the thought fueling a small, desperate ember of defiance. She lay still, forced to listen to Kael's ragged, poisoned breathing fading into the distance. His scent, usually potent and commanding, was now thin and metallic, tainted by the wolfsbane. This profound physical and emotional vulnerability peaked for both of them. Kael was helpless in iron chains, and Selene was physically incapacitated, feeling a crushing despair that was far worse than the loneliness of her rogue years. She felt utterly powerless. However, as the cold seeped into her bones, threatening to steal her consciousness, a fierce, primal voice clawed its way out of the fog. I am a survivor. I am his mate. Her internal dialogue shifted from grief to grim resolve. She couldn't wait for Kael to save her, she had to save herself and, by extension, him. Because she had accepted the bond, she now recognized her strength was not just her agility, but the unbreakable thread connecting her to the captured Alpha. She dragged herself to the riverbank, the freezing water a jarring shock that helped clear her head. She stripped a section of birch bark, her fingers trembling, and managed to find the necessary ingredients for a rough poultice, crushed cedar berries and specific mosses that counteracted minor wolfsbane poisoning. Unlike the helpless, betrayed girl she used to be, this version of Selene relied on innate knowledge and grit. She knew this was a race against the poison and Rorik's sadistic clock. Every moment I spend injured is a moment Kael suffers alone, she thought, the realization pushing her past the exhaustion. She had to transform her profound despair into a lethal weapon. She looked toward the dark hills where Kael had been taken, a single, sharp thought hardening her resolve. I must rely on my own inner strength, for his sake. She could not, would not, wait for the one who was chained. Chapter 17, The Judas Kiss. Selene spent the next agonizing day moving, not toward Kael's known pack territory for help, but toward Rorik's lair, using only the faintest scent trail and her own sharpened instincts. She moved through thick, silent woods, her injured body protesting every step, the pain a constant, grinding reminder of her failure. Her goal was pure survival and reconnaissance, but her emotional state was a tempest of fear and frustration. She needed intelligence, and she needed a distraction. She made her way to a clandestine, remote trading post, a place shifters used for black market medicinal herbs and information. Therefore, she was startled when she encountered a familiar figure in the shadowed corner of the post. Anya, a low-ranking she-wolf Selene had known peripherally during her brief, unhappy time in Kael's pack. Anya had always presented herself as an outcast, a fellow victim of pack hierarchies. "Selene? I heard Rorik had captured you," Anya whispered, her eyes wide with what Selene initially registered as sympathy. "I know a way into his defenses. We need to save Kael." Selene, desperate for an ally, lowered her guard slightly. Although she had always fought her flaw of distrust, the urgency of the situation forced her to consider the partnership. "What's the way in?" "He has him chained with iron," Selene replied, her tone guarded but hopeful. Anya provided the details: a seldom-used tunnel beneath the main compound, accessible only by a hidden lever beneath a specific, ancient hearthstone. Selene felt a surge of relief, believing her luck had finally turned. But as Selene moved to leave, Anya's supposed sympathy curdled into a sickly sweet malice. "You were always foolish, Selene. Kael's alpha status is too much power for an emotional wreck like him." Anya stepped back, revealing two large, menacing guards from Rorik's pack emerging from the back room. "Rorik promised me a place by his side. A clean slate. And you, dear mate, were my ticket." The betrayal was immediate, sharp, and agonizing. Anya hadn't been an ally, she was a calculated mole. The unexpected twist plunged Selene into a fresh wave of grief and furious resignation, forcing her to confront the fundamental flaw she carried. Her desperate hunger for connection made her vulnerable to manipulation. She was betrayed by the very person who had mirrored her previous existence. Selene fought with vicious, desperate energy, fueled by the sting of the Judas kiss. She managed to escape, leaving Anya sprawled on the floor, but the encounter wasted precious time. However, as Selene sprinted back toward Rorik's territory, she heard a sound, not a human cry, but a primal, triumphant roar. The roar was followed by the deafening sound of snapping iron. Kael's wolf, against the odds, was breaking free. The race against time had just begun, because his escape meant Rorik would be desperate and lethal. Chapter 18, Acceptance in the Darkness. The triumphant, guttural roar of Kael's liberation echoed across the hills, a brief moment of intense relief swiftly followed by renewed dread. Now Rorik was hunting a grievously poisoned alpha wolf, and Kael was hunting the enemy alpha. The final, fatal collision was imminent. Selene arrived at the perimeter of Rorik's compound just as the sun dipped, painting the sky in violent shades of crimson and violet. She found Kael near the outskirts, barely holding his shift, his wolf form marred by the dark, spreading stain of wolfsbane. He was weak, swaying, yet his silver eyes burned with a single, focused intent: Rorik. Rorik emerged from the darkness, dragging the innocent human children forward, using them as living shields. "Look at your king, rogue." Rorik cackled, his voice thick with maniacal glee. "Broken, poisoned, and useless. You will watch him die, and then I will take everything he chose you over." All truly seemed lost. Kael was too weak to fight, the children were held hostage, and Selene was trapped between her injured body and Rorik's final, lethal gambit. The deepest fear of Selene, the fear of watching the person she loved be destroyed by his own commitment to her, was being realized. Therefore, Selene fell to her knees, not in surrender, but in a moment of absolute, psychological reckoning. She closed her eyes, allowing the primal force of the fated bond to flood her system. She accepted the bond, she embraced her courage, and she accepted the terrifying truth that their lives were now irrevocably intertwined. "I am his mate. I am the other half of this power." She opened her eyes, the familiar terror replaced by a cold, fierce determination. She shifted, her transformation fluid and purposeful. Unlike her previous shifts, this one felt different, empowered, centered, and whole. The internal acceptance had set the stage for the final push. "You don't understand, Rorik," Selene said, her voice a low, steady growl that carried surprising authority. "You thought you broke him with poison. You only broke the lock. The bond is the true weapon." She moved toward the poisoned Kael, ignoring Rorik entirely. Rorik, confused by her sudden, fearless defiance, hesitated. At that moment, Selene reached Kael, and in a profound act of love and power, she pressed her muzzle against the toxic wound on his flank, willingly drawing some of the paralyzing poison into her own system, sharing the burden. The shock was blinding, painful, but the action immediately strengthened Kael, transferring a portion of his agony to her and stabilizing his shift. Kael roared, not in pain this time, but in pure, protective outrage. He was weakened, but no longer defeated. Selene had confronted her fear and given him the final, desperate strength he needed. The psychological turning point was complete, and the stage was set for the final, bloody confrontation. Chapter 19, The Bond's New Power. The agonizing, shared burden of the wolfsbane had forged a new, terrifying strength between Selene and Kael. Now they stood side by side near Rorik's compound, Kael's massive form still bearing the dark stain of the poison, Selene's movements slightly hampered by the toxin she had absorbed, yet their connection was fierce and absolute. The primal energy thrumming between them was palpable, like an electrical current running between two powerful, charged poles. Rorik, having witnessed their impossible defiance, had retreated inside his crude stronghold, using the captive children as human shields against any further frontal assault. Therefore, Kael and Selene needed not just power, but cunning. They slipped into the deeper shadows of the woods, secretly reuniting to devise their final, lethal plan. "The bond allows me to anticipate your movements," Kael murmured, his voice still ragged but laced with renewed authority. They communicated with a seamless blend of low human whispers and mental images, a language only mates understood. "You are small, you are fast. I will draw their fire, while you move beneath their perception." Selene, now fully determined and focused, nodded, feeling empowered by the love and trust in his eyes. Her goal was clear: utilize her agility and knowledge of the terrain to turn the tables on Rorik. Unlike her previous attempts at solo heroism, this was a perfectly synchronized strategy, combining his brute strength with her survivalist stealth. "Rorik is arrogant. He thinks only you are the threat. We use his contempt for me as our weapon," she responded, her voice tight with focused resolve. They began executing their plan immediately. Kael, shifting only partially to maximize speed while maintaining communication, launched a loud, aggressive diversion at the compound's main gate. He roared challenges and tore at the flimsy barricades, consequently drawing every available guard, including Rorik's most loyal warriors, to the front line. Meanwhile, Selene, a silent blur of silver, utilized the hidden tunnel Anya had described, the unexpected knowledge from the earlier betrayal now turning into a critical asset. She crept through the dank, narrow passage, the air heavy with the smell of stagnant water and cold earth. Anya's greed will be his undoing, she thought, the realization deepening her sense of justified vengeance. She emerged inside the stronghold's main chamber. The place was a chaos of raw wood and terrified whimpers from the bound children. Selene had successfully turned the tables. She had infiltrated the heart of the enemy's lair. This full embrace of her courage cemented her growth from a fearful fugitive to a decisive warrior. She was no longer running from fear, she was running toward justice. The high stakes were immediate, she was surrounded by enemy guards, but she had the element of surprise. The final confrontation was only moments away. Chapter 20, The Breach. Selene's sudden appearance inside Rorik's stronghold sent a wave of shock through the few guards Rorik had left behind to watch the children. As a result, the interior erupted into a furious, tense melee. Selene fought with the desperate intensity of a mother defending her young, her agility allowing her to dodge the clumsy, surprised swings of the larger guards. Her objective was simple: protect the innocents, survive the initial assault, and create a breach for Kael. The tension was excruciatingly high. She needed to draw Rorik's attention away from the hostages and toward the inevitable showdown. Therefore, she used the chaos as cover, slicing the restraints on the children and urging them toward the back wall. "Go. Hide. Don't make a sound," she commanded, her voice a low, fierce whisper. The sound of shattering wood and a thunderous roar from the main gates signaled Kael's successful breakthrough. He burst into the chamber, a magnificent, terrifying vision of black fur and unbridled fury, his eyes immediately locking onto Selene and the hostages. Unlike his earlier controlled demeanor, Kael fought with a primal abandon, knowing there was nothing left to lose but the woman he loved. Their attack was now perfectly coordinated. Kael engaged the strongest guards, his brute force ripping through Rorik's remaining defense, while Selene, swift and precise, protected his poisoned flank and ensured the children remained safe. Their full active participation in the battle was a breathtaking display of true mating power, the emotional climax building with every synchronized maneuver. However, Rorik was a desperate animal. Seeing his forces decimated and his hostages escaping, he turned his full, terrifying focus on Selene. He lunged, bypassing Kael, aiming for the one he knew the Alpha King could not bear to lose. Selene met him halfway, shifting to confront him directly. They crashed to the floor, teeth bared, fury radiating between them. Rorik tried to pin her, snarling, "You are nothing, little rogue. You will never be a queen." Just as he raised a massive paw for a final strike, Kael slammed into Rorik, driving him back with a roar that shook the rafters. Kael stood over Rorik, poisoned, wounded, but utterly dominant. He knew this was the all-or-nothing moment, the final, desperate cornering of the rival Alpha. They had him trapped, but Rorik's eyes held a dangerous, final spark of madness. Kael looked at Selene, his eyes communicating a silent, primal promise: "It ends now." Chapter 21, The Colliding Fates. The final showdown began with a chilling, electric silence. Rorik was cornered, Kael was wounded but dominant, and Selene was poised, ready to protect her mate and end the long nightmare. Because their personal and external stakes had fully collided, the air was thick with the scent of blood, fear, and the raw, unadulterated power of two warring alphas. Rorik, knowing his physical strength was no longer enough, resorted to his final, emotional attack. He stared directly at Kael. "You are weak, Kael. You allowed her to break your rules, and now you face the same fate as before, betrayal. She will leave you, too, when the safety is gone." Kael didn't flinch. He looked at Selene, his silver eyes dark with an intense, raw love that banished the ghost of Lyra forever. Unlike the hesitant, guilt-ridden man who had banished her, this Kael was fully realized. "She is my choice, Rorik," Kael declared, his voice ringing with finality. "And she is my strength." Rorik lunged, not toward Kael, but toward the hidden children, aiming to destroy the last shred of Kael's duty and hope. Selene reacted instantaneously. Her fear was gone, replaced by a pure, maternal fury. She intercepted Rorik, her smaller body slamming into his side, diverting his attack. The intensity of their primal connection was tested fully in this final moment. Kael, recovering from the initial blow, joined the fray. The personal fight between the two males, the one who chose duty and the one who chose love, intertwined violently with the external struggle for survival. Like two halves of a single ancient weapon, Selene and Kael fought as one. Selene bit deep into Rorik's exposed neck, not with the intent to kill, but to shock and disable. The agonizing pain forced Rorik to stumble, giving Kael the final, necessary opening. Kael moved with a devastating finality, his teeth sinking into Rorik's throat, severing the rival Alpha's threat forever. The fight ended not with a whimper, but with a guttural, earth-shaking snarl of absolute dominance and victory from Kael. Selene collapsed beside him, panting, the adrenaline draining away, realizing they had survived. The climax was imminent, the external threat was over, but the emotional fallout and the future of their dangerous, passionate bond remained. Chapter 22, The Claim. The resounding snarl of Kael's final, victorious action echoed through the chamber, a sound of profound relief that washed over Selene, cleansing the terror and the pain. Rorik's threat was extinguished, his reign of terror over. Immediately, the adrenaline that had sustained Selene fled her body, leaving her weak, trembling, yet utterly triumphant. The moment of victory was also the moment of ultimate commitment. Kael, still half-shifted, turned his massive head toward her, his silver eyes blazing with an emotion far beyond simple victory. It was possession, gratitude, and overwhelming love. Because the emotional and physical fight had intertwined so completely, the bond activated in full force, a brilliant, terrifying flash of golden energy connecting their two forms, visible only to them. He nudged her gently, checking her injuries, a deep, rumbling whine replacing his earlier ferocious snarl. Selene shifted back to her human form, feeling the rapid, soothing rush of her inherent healing factor at work. Kael shifted, too, his naked, powerful body kneeling before her in the rubble. He was wounded, poisoned, but whole in his emotional commitment. "You saved me," he rasped, his voice thick with raw emotion, reaching out to cup her face in his large, scarred hand. "You shared the wolf's bane. You risked death to keep my heart beating." Selene leaned into his touch, no longer resisting the fierce, consuming heat of their connection. "I am your mate," she whispered, the words sounding foreign yet utterly true on her tongue. "I will not let fear or betrayal take you from me. Not again." He moved closer, his gaze dropping to her neck, the spot where he had placed his first accidental mark. Unlike the hesitant touches of their earlier encounters, this time his action was deliberate, possessive, and final. He lowered his head and marked her, a definitive, mating bite that was intensely painful yet utterly exhilarating. It wasn't a punishment, it was a profound, binding vow. The sharp pain dissolved into a wave of euphoric pleasure, sealing their lives, their powers, and their destinies together. The emotional release was immediate and total. Selene wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face against his strong shoulder. The conflict was resolved, she had protected him, she had claimed him, and they had survived. The transformation was complete, and their future, however dangerous, was irrevocably shared. Chapter 23, Tending to the Wounds. The immediate aftermath of the climax was a sudden, heavy silence, broken only by the whimpering of the freed children and the ragged breathing of the exhausted mates. Following the claim, Kael and Selene spent their first moments tending not only to their own wounds but to the lingering trauma of the innocents. They had to reconcile the pack dynamics swiftly. Kael, though poisoned and deeply wounded, summoned his remaining strength to address the few surviving guards of Rorik's faction. He established dominance with a weary, yet absolute authority. The remaining wolves, witnessing their Alpha King's sacrifice and Selene's fierce loyalty, bowed low in instant, absolute submission. They had seen the bond activated, and they understood the new reality. Selene worked tirelessly, her hands moving with an instinctive knowledge of herbal remedies and swift binding. She applied potent poultices to Kael's wolfsbane wound, drawing out the last vestiges of the poison. Because they were mates, she instinctively knew where his pain was worst, where his defenses were lowest. "This is not how I envisioned your return to the pack," Kael managed, his voice soft, resting his massive hand over hers as she worked. A faint smile touched his lips, transforming his features from the stern alpha to the gentleman she had come to love. "My return was never supposed to be on your terms, Alpha," she countered, meeting his gaze. "It had to be on mine. And yours, the man, not the title." The falling action was slow, tender, and deeply vulnerable. They shared the painful stories of their exile and sorrow, their voices low, weaving their shattered pasts into a single, cohesive narrative. Kael confessed the depth of his self-blame over Lyra, and Selene confessed the crushing loneliness of her rogue years. Their emotional closure was necessary, wiping the slate clean of past betrayals and fears. The pack dynamics were quickly shifting. The wolves who had once shunned her now looked upon her with respect, seeing her healing hands and the protective mark on her neck. Hints of future stability began to bloom in the quiet of the night. Consequently, as the moon reached its zenith, Kael drew her close, holding her against his strong, warm chest. "My queen," he murmured, his breath hot against her hair. "You saved my duty, my pack, and my life. There is no longer room for fear or distance." The joy and vulnerability of the moment solidified their hard-won love. Chapter 24, A Shared Horizon. The quiet, silver light of the moon filtered into the restored Alpha house weeks later. The wounds, physical and emotional, were healing. The chaos of the past was replaced by a deep, resonant peace. Rorik's threat was permanently neutralized, the innocence returned, and the pack, now stronger and more unified than ever, had willingly accepted Selene as their Luna, the fierce warrior who fought alongside their king. Selene stood by the large window, gazing out at the vast, protected forest. She was no longer a guarded, broken orphan, she was an empowered mate, fully trusting the safety and commitment of the pack and the man beside her. Kael, standing behind her, wrapped his strong arms around her waist, drawing her back against his chest. He had evolved from the guilt-ridden, closed-off alpha to a protective, emotionally open partner, capable of receiving love without the fear of failure. "No more running," he whispered, his voice deep with contentment. "Our paths are one now, Selene. We share the territory, the duty, and the burden. We share the strength," she corrected gently, turning in his embrace. Unlike the rigid hierarchy she had feared, their relationship was a seamless blend of his authority and her fierce independence. The new equilibrium was finally established. Life had stabilized, not returned to normal, but shifted into something entirely new and powerful. This sense of peace was a testament to their profound, costly transformation. They decided to perform the final ritual together, a commitment to their primal selves and their shared future. They shifted simultaneously, their transformations a mirror image of dedication and power, no longer born of pain or necessity, but of pure, profound love. The sight of their two forms, the magnificent, black alpha wolf and the sleek, silver Luna wolf, standing side by side in the moonlit clearing was the final impression. Kael's wolf nudged her silver muzzle, a low, contented purr rumbling deep in his chest. The moonlight bathed them in a soft, ethereal glow, symbolizing their eternal bond and their readiness to face whatever destiny held. They stood, fully claimed and in love, two powerful souls who had fought fate, betrayal, and fear, only to find their truest selves in the arms of the other. Their shared future stretched before them, a wide, open horizon defined by strength, passion, and unbroken trust.